December 13th, 1939, dawn over the South Atlantic. The first naval battle of the Second World War is about to begin. 3 British cruisers, outgunned, outmatched, and hundreds of miles from help, close in on a single German raider. The Admiral Graf Spee, a ship so powerful it could annihilate them in minutes. But on her bridge stands a captain unlike any other in Hitler's navy, Hans Langsdorff, a man of conscience trapped in a war of monsters. As shells begin to fall and the sea catches fire, he must choose between glory, duty, and the code of honor that may cost him everything. This is the story of the Battle of the River Plate, where the war's first sea clash became a duel of pride, deception, and fate. When war erupted in September 1939, the oceans became vast hunting grounds. The German Kriegsmarine knew it couldn't match the Royal Navy ship for ship, but it could bleed it dry, one merchant vessel at a time. Into this strategy sailed the Admiral Graf Spee, a pocket battleship, small by battleship standards, but a predator among cruisers. Armed with 11-inch guns and built for speed, she roamed the South Atlantic like a wolf on open plains. Her mission, sink Allied merchant convoys, cut Britain's lifeline to the colonies, and vanish before retribution could find her. Captain Hans Langsdorff commanded her not as a brute, but as a seaman of the old school, courteous, precise, even chivalrous. He captured crews rather than killing them, treated prisoners well, and followed the rules of naval warfare long since abandoned by others. To his men, he was the embodiment of honor at sea. To the British Admiralty, he was a phantom threat, a hunter with a conscience, but a hunter nonetheless. For weeks, the Graf Spee wreaked havoc, sending 9 Allied ships to the bottom. The Royal Navy responded with fury, dispatching hunting groups from every corner of the Atlantic. By December, 3 British cruisers, Exeter, Ajax, and Achilles, under Commodore Henry Harwood, believed they'd found the beast. They converged near the mouth of the River Plate, off the coast of Uruguay. It was a trap born of instinct and desperation, and against all odds, it worked. The Graf Spee emerged from the morning mist straight into their crosshairs. The first naval battle of the Second World War was about to begin, not in the North Sea, but half a world away, under the blazing South American sun. At dawn on December 13th, 1939, the South Atlantic shimmered like burnished glass. The Graf Spee, low and menacing, plowed through gentle swells, her steel hull a cathedral of quiet tension. Captain Langsdorff studied his charts, unaware that fate was already closing in from the west. Commodore Henry Harwood, aboard HMS Ajax, had gambled everything on a hunch. He predicted that the German raider would strike near the River Plate estuary, a perfect spot to catch vulnerable shipping routes. His plan: divide his modest force and draw the Graf Spee into battle, even though he was hopelessly outgunned. His cruisers were slender, lightly armored, and half the German ship's size. But they had one advantage Langsdorff lacked: they were hungry for a fight. Each British sailor knew the world was watching. This was the opening act of a global war. If they lost here, Hitler's raiders would roam the seas unchecked. As the horizon brightened, Harwood's signal officers caught the faint outline of smoke against the sky. Enemy in sight. The cry rippled through the ships, electrifying every man from the gun decks to the bridge. Langsdorff, realizing too late that his ambushers were warships, not merchants, swung his guns into position. Within minutes, the calm sea would be transformed into a furnace of fire and steel. Each man aboard those ships, British and German alike, knew this battle was not just about survival. It was about proving who would rule the oceans in this new and terrible war. The sea erupted. At 6:18 a.m. Graf Spee fired first, her 11-inch guns booming like thunderclaps across the South Atlantic. The shells landed in great geysers of water around HMS Exeter, the lead British cruiser. Within moments, one found its mark, tearing through the bridge and killing nearly everyone there. Smoke and blood filled the air, and yet Exeter refused to fall silent. From below decks, wounded gunners dragged themselves back to their posts. They reloaded by touch, shouting through the roar, "Keep firing." Commodore Harwood's smaller ships, Ajax and Achilles, darted in from either side. trying to flank the enemy like hunting dogs harrying a bear. Their 6-inch guns flashed again and again, spitting defiance at a foe that could obliterate them with a single well-placed hit. Langsdorff commanded with a cold precision that masked the storm in his mind. He knew he had the superior ship, thicker armor, heavier guns, greater range. Yet every salvo he fired felt like swatting at ghosts. The British cruisers moved unpredictably, zigzagging through the chaos, closing the distance he needed to keep them away. Then, in a moment of madness or brilliance, Ajax and Achilles charged straight in. The sea between them and Graf, Spee boiled with near misses and flying shrapnel. On board Ajax, the deck was slick with oil and seawater. Sailors loaded shells with trembling hands, their faces blackened with soot. Range, 6,000 yards, the gunnery officer shouted. Harwood clenched his jaw. Fire everything you've got. The nightmarish duel raged for over an hour. Exeter, burning and listing, turned away, her guns still thundering until the last turret went silent. Ajax had lost 2 turrets. Achilles was riddled with holes. Yet somehow, incredibly, all 3 remained afloat, and the Graf Spee was retreating. Langsdorff stared out from his shattered bridge. His fuel tanks were leaking. His ammunition was low. His radar was damaged. And on the horizon, he imagined, or thought he imagined, the dark silhouettes of reinforcements closing in. The hunter had become the hunted. By late afternoon, the Graf Spee limped toward Montevideo harbor, smoke trailing behind her like a wound that refused to close. The once-proud ship was battered, her engines crippled, her crew exhausted, her commander weighed down by the knowledge that his victory had turned to ruin. Captain Hans Langsdorff stood on the bridge, hat in hand, his face pale beneath the grime. He had done everything a naval officer could, fought cleanly, honored the code of the sea, yet now he faced an impossible choice. Neutral Uruguay allowed him only 72 hours to make repairs. Beyond that window, the Royal Navy would be waiting, and he knew what awaited outside the harbor. Death for his men and his ship alike. News of the battle spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered on the docks, journalists swarmed the waterfront, and the world's eyes turned toward the Rio de la Plata. British intelligence, ever cunning, fed a rumor into the mix that a powerful British fleet, including the battleship Renown and aircraft carrier Ark Royal, was closing in. It was a bluff, but Langsdorff couldn't afford to gamble lives on a rumor. For 3 days, the tension in Montevideo thickened like smoke. Diplomats negotiated, spies whispered, and inside Graf Spee, sailors packed their personal belongings in grim silence. They knew what was coming. On the evening of December 17, 1939, Langsdorff gathered his officers. His voice was calm, almost tender. He would not let his men die for nothing. He would not let Graf Spee be paraded as a trophy. Just after sunset, the Admiral Graf Spee steamed slowly out of harbor, her crew already disembarked and anchored in the shallow waters of the estuary. Moments later, explosions ripped through her hull. Flames bloomed against the twilight sky as the ship that once terrorized the Atlantic died by her own hand. On shore, Langsdorff watched from a distance, the firelight flickering across his face. The pride of Germany burned quietly into the sea, and with it, a chapter of naval chivalry came to an end. The flames of the Graf Spee lit more than the night sky. They illuminated the shifting tides of a global war. To the British, it was the first real victory of World War II, a triumph of cunning over strength, of resolve over machinery. The Royal Navy, battered but unbroken, had proven that discipline and deception could bring down even the most formidable opponent. London rejoiced. Churchill himself would later call it a heartening example of what the free world could achieve when it refused to yield. For Germany, it was a humiliation wrapped in tragedy. Nazi propaganda had once boasted that the Graf Spee was invincible, the Panzerskiff, a sea fortress on the waves. Now it lay at the bottom of a South American estuary, undone not by overwhelming force, but by illusion and fear. And for the neutral nations, Uruguay, Argentina, and the watching Americas, it was a spectacle of modern warfare's strange morality. Civilians along the Montevideo shoreline cheered the blaze, not knowing whether they were witnessing the death of tyranny or the loss of brave men who had simply obeyed orders. Langsdorff, ever the gentleman sailor, could not bear to see his men dishonored. 2 days after scuttling his ship, he lay down on the floor of a Buenos Aires hotel room, draped in the naval ensign of Imperial Germany, not Hitler's flag, and took his own life with a pistol. He left a note: "I shall answer to my conscience and my God for the decision I have made." In that act, he became something paradoxical, an enemy commander remembered with respect. Even his British adversaries sent condolences. Commodore Howard called him a gallant and honorable opponent. The Battle of the River Plate had begun as a clash of steel and ended as a human story, one of pride, deception, and the strange dignity that sometimes survives even amid the ruin of war. The Battle of the River Plate remains one of the strangest tales of the early war, not a slaughter, but a duel of honor fought in an age rapidly losing any sense of it. In hindsight, it was less about victory or defeat and more about the end of an era, when men like Langsdorff still believed that war could be conducted with decency, and when the sea still felt like a stage for courage rather than annihilation. The engagement foreshadowed the war's coming brutality. Soon the Atlantic would boil with wolf packs of U-boats, and the notion of a gentleman's fight would vanish beneath the waves. Yet the story of Graf Spee endures because it reminds us that even amid chaos, individual conscience can cut through ideology. Howard returned to Britain a hero, Langsdorff to a quiet grave in Buenos Aires. But their fates were strangely intertwined. Two naval officers who fought each other fiercely, yet were bound by the same code of respect and restraint. In a world that would soon see Dresden, Hiroshima, and Auschwitz, the River Plate feels almost mythic, a fleeting echo of an older world, swallowed by the total war that followed. History, after all, is rarely just a record of victories. It is the story of men trying, in the unmaking of worlds, to remain human.